Quick heads up before we get to today's episode. Founding member enrollment for the Emerging Writers Academy closes this Thursday, January 15th. If you want monthly group coaching, practical craft guidance, and a serious writing community to help you move your story forward, head on over to nancypanuccio.com/writer. nancypanuccio.com/writer. All right, let's get into today's episode. A story isn't built by cramming everything you've thought about into one book. The story is built by finding the essential elements and following it. Writer Unleashed is for you, a writer who has a story you want to bring onto the page and into the hearts and minds of readers. I'm Nancy Panuccio, writer, editor, and book coach. Each week, we'll explore techniques, mindsets, and inspiration for writing stories readers can't put down. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now, let's begin. Okay, you have a pile of material. Maybe it's notes scattered across notebooks and computer documents. Maybe it's a rough first draft, 100, maybe 300 pages that feel unwieldy, more like exploration than a story. Maybe it's scenes written out of order or bits of dialogue or research with highlights. Maybe you have character sketches. Maybe it's all of the above. Whatever form it takes, it's raw material. And you're supposed to somehow find the actual story in there. So what do? Do you organize everything? Do you start writing new pages? Do you make an outline? How do you see the story in the mess, in the random pile of notes or a messy, sprawling first draft? How do you get your arms around your material and start shaping it into a story? In today's episode, I'll show you how to look at your raw material more intuitively to see what keeps showing up, what has energy, what you keep coming back to, and what patterns you see. I'm going to walk you through how to look at your material so you can find the story that's already trying to emerge. I'll help you see what your story is trying to become. Because here's what I've learned from coaching writers through this exact situation. Your notes or your rough draft already contain clues about what story you need to tell. You just need to know what to look for. So let's get right to it. Number one, I want you to look for what keeps repeating. Look for patterns across your material. What images show up multiple times? What situations? What relationships? What are the dynamics? Is there a metaphor you keep coming back to? For example, in Amy Hempel's story In the Cemetery Where Al Jolson is Buried, there's a chimp that the two characters talk about, and it appears 3 times throughout the story, and particularly at the end. So when she was writing the story, this chimp came up as a metaphor. And by the 3rd time it's mentioned, it comes to represent grief. So for example, what is it about the bonsai tree the brother keeps sending his mother from California? What does the bonsai tree represent? Why is it in your story? Maybe you keep coming back to a moment of betrayal. Maybe you've written the same confrontation 3 different ways. Maybe a particular setting or image keeps appearing. Repetition is signal. Your subconscious is circling back to what matters. It's the things that you're obsessed with. So make a quick list. What are the things that show up more than once in your rough draft, even if it's in different versions? highlight them. Don't judge anything. For now, you're just noticing what's in your raw material. Okay, on to number 2. I want you to look for what excites you. Read through your raw material and ask what still gives you energy. You may have had this idea and your notes circling your mind for months, maybe even years. Some ideas that felt exciting when you first wrote them may now feel flat, and that's normal. You've changed, your relationship to the material has evolved, but some notes, some of that raw material will still spark something when you read them. A character will still intrigue you, a scene that you can't wait to write and flesh out, or a question you genuinely want to explore, a moment of conflict or tension that pulls you forward or creates some excitement in your body. Energy is signal. It tells you what you're compelled to write about, what you're genuinely excited to write, not just what you think you should be writing. So go through and mark everything that still excites you, everything that makes you think, yes, I want to write this, or I need to know what happens here. This isn't about what's most important to the story objectively. It's about what has juice for you right now. Because if you're not energized by your own material, you won't have the stamina to draft 80,000 words about it. Okay, number 3. I want you to look for where you feel something. This is crucial. Which sentences, paragraphs, lines of dialogue, what moments make you feel something when you read them? Not think something, feel something. Maybe there's a moment between a father and son that makes you cry. Maybe there's an image of a character alone in a specific setting that feels haunting. Maybe there are lines of dialogue or one line of dialogue that still gives you chills, even though you wrote it maybe 6 months ago. Those moments of genuine emotion are gold. They tell you what this story is really about underneath the words. So you might have 20 pages of notes about the mechanics of your plot and one paragraph about a character standing at a gravesite, and that one paragraph might be the emotional heart of the entire story. So don't dismiss emotion as soft or less important than your plot. Readers remember how a story made them feel long after they forget what happened. So mark the moments in your draft, in your raw material, that move you, even if you don't understand why yet. Even if they seem disconnected from the rest of your material. These are your anchors. These are the moments you're writing toward or writing from. Okay, number 4. I want you to look for the questions that you're still probing. What do you actually want to know? What are you yearning to know? So look at your rough material for those kinds of questions, not craft questions like, should I use first person or third, but story questions, questions about the characters, their choices, their world, questions that are personal for you. Now, these may be questions like, how does one forgive themselves for something they did in their past, for some pain they caused someone in their past? What would it take for them to reconcile? How far would this character go to protect her secret? Would she actually leave him if she knew the truth? How does one leave an abusive relationship? Is redemption possible after what he did? These questions reveal what you're personally curious about, what you're probing about life and about humanity. And curiosity is the fuel that gets you through a draft. If you're not curious about something in your story, if you already know all the answers, you're going to get bored writing it. And readers will sense that boredom. They'll get bored too. But if you have genuine questions, if you're writing to discover those answers, if you're probing answers about human nature, about the world, about culture, about society, about how people survive trauma, if you're writing to discover those answers, that curiosity translates to the page and readers feel it because every story is moving towards some sublime truth. And when a story works, readers feel like they're moving towards that sublime truth themselves. So look through your raw material, look through your notes. What questions are you actually asking? What do you want to find out by writing this story? Those questions point toward your story. Those are the thematic questions that build the framework for your story. Okay, once you've done all of this, I want you to look through your raw material and ask, what doesn't actually fit with what I'm discovering here? Maybe you have elaborate world building for a fantasy setting, but every scene you're excited about is actually intimate and character focused. Maybe the fantasy elements don't matter as much as you thought. Maybe you have pages about a secondary character's backstory, but they never connect to your protagonist's journey. Maybe that character is interesting, but not necessary. Maybe you have a whole subplot sketched out that has nothing to do with the central conflict you keep circling back to. This isn't about cutting yet. It's about noticing. It's about seeing clearly what's on the page. Noticing what doesn't resonate with the emerging story helps you see what does. So make a separate list of notes that feel disconnected or tangential. You don't have to delete them, just set them aside for now. They might be seeds for a different story. Okay, once you've done all of that, and if I were to ask you, what's your story about? What would you say? Just answer from what you remember, what's alive in your head right now. So maybe you say something like, it's about a woman who has to go back to her hometown after her father dies, and she hasn't been back in 20 years because of this huge fight with her family. And now she has to decide whether to tell them the truth about why she really left or just keep pretending. So notice what you included in that off-the-cuff summary. Notice what you left out. You probably didn't mention the elaborate world-building details you spent weeks on. You probably didn't mention the secondary character you wrote 10 pages about. You mentioned the core emotional situation, the character, the problem, the stakes. So that summary often contains your actual story, stripped of all the extra material. Okay, now go back to your rough draft or your notes and see, is that story actually there? Do you have material that supports that summary? Or did you just describe the story you wish you had on the page? If it's the latter, that's okay. Now you know what to focus on generating. You'll discover so much. You'll discover what you actually know about these characters versus what you think you know. You'll discover what the conflict really is. You'll discover the emotional stakes. Okay, so number one, what keeps repeating? Look for patterns across your material. Number two, what excites you about this rough material? Number three, where do you feel moved emotionally? Number four, what are you curious about? What about this story makes you want to probe it deeper? And finally, how would you sum up what you have so far in a few sentences? Okay, what do you do when nothing is clear yet? What if your story is a real mess that's all over the place? Sometimes you'll do all of this and still not see a clear story emerging. Your rough draft or your notes are truly scattered. Nothing has clear patterns. You're not sure what excites you anymore. And if that's the case, here are two options. Option one, just generate new material. Maybe what's on the page right now is from an earlier version of your thinking, and you've evolved past that. So put them aside and do some fresh generative writing. Try free writing about what interests you about this story right now. Write a scene that scares you a little. Write dialogue between your protagonist and the person they're in conflict with. Write the ending, even if you don't know how you'll get there. New material might clarify what the old notes or your rough draft was reaching for. Option two, just pick one thread that excites you and follow it. Even if you're not sure it's the right story thread, just pick something that you're excited to explore. Maybe it's a character, maybe it's a relationship, it's a moment, and commit to exploring it. You can always change direction later, but often committing to one story thread that you're excited to follow, even temporarily, helps you see the whole tapestry more clearly. Now, here's something important. You don't have to use everything in your raw material. Not everything that's in your raw material or your notes belongs in this story. Maybe you spent a lot of time researching something or developing something, but that doesn't mean it has to be in this book. Your rough draft or your notes are exploration. Your messy first draft is exploration. Most of what you explore won't make it to the final story. That's not wasted work. That's how you discover what the story actually is, by exploring what it isn't. So give yourself permission to set aside any beautiful material that doesn't serve this particular story. You can always use it somewhere else in a different story later. Because a story isn't built by cramming everything you've thought about into one book. The story is built by finding the essential elements and following it. Trust what emerges. Looking at your raw material isn't about forcing a story into existence. It's about seeing what's already trying to emerge and helping it along. Your subconscious has been working on this story through all the iterations that you have, through all of this rough material that you've generated. The repetitions, the energy, those aren't random, they're signals. So trust what keeps coming back. Trust what makes you feel something. Trust the character who fascinates you and the conflict that you can't stop circling. The story's in there. You don't have to invent it from scratch. You just have to recognize it and pay attention to what's already on the page and track where you're feeling energized, where you're feeling fascinated, where you're being pulled in. Once you recognize that, once you can name it clearly enough to write that one sentence story statement, you're ready to start drafting. Not because you have everything figured out, because that's not how it works, but because you have enough to begin. The rest you're going to discover by writing. So there you have it. Thanks for hanging out with me today. If you know any writers who need some support in their writing, please share this episode or the Writer Unleashed podcast in general. And if you love what you're listening to, subscribe on your favorite listening platform. And if you're listening on Apple, please leave me a review. Reading how this podcast impacts your writing truly lights me up and helps me create topics for the show. Till next time, keep writing, and I'll talk to you soon.